have fun at your midnight showing of Blade 2.
In the late 90s and early 2000s, black leather, sunglasses, and trench coats defined the rule of cool, and it was all thanks to the runaway successes of movies like The Matrix and Blade. The costume aesthetics, the emotionally distant characters, and the infinitely entertaining action scenes featured in these movies were endlessly copied and parodied during this time period. Whether it was movies like Underworld, Resident Evil, Equilibrium, or bottom-of-the-barrel schlock like Bulletproof Monk, The Matrix and Blade had left everyone in Hollywood trying to replicate their iconic styles. But the influence of these movies didn't stop at Hollywood. Inevitably, a smash hit of jaw-dropping action and special effects like The Matrix inspired many young aspiring filmmakers to put their best foot forward. And it's in the crossroads of genuine inspiration and Hollywood trend writing that we get Reign in Darkness, a low-budget indie movie from Australia that aspired to be the next big franchise in the vein of Blade. Released in 2002 and made on the meager budget of $49,000, Reign in Darkness is without a doubt the cheapest and the worst ripoff of The Matrix and Blade to ever see the light of day. But as with Nurse 3D, I present this movie to you not out of hatred, but out of love. Because while Reign in Darkness doesn't succeed in being an exciting supernatural blockbuster, it does succeed in being a hilarious comedy.
Michael, you're delusional. You need help.
The ridiculousness of this movie starts with its premise, which is essentially that a team of researchers trying to cure HIV end up accidentally making a virus that turns people into vampires. While this premise on its own sounds laughable, it would be an injustice not to go into the convoluted details of its execution. The opening text gives us the basis for the movie's plot, a virus called K-17 that turns people into vampires and has been covered up by the government. A virus that the movie claims is real. While this might sound like a real crackpot conspiracy you might run into on the web, and certainly visiting the film's now defunct website would lead you to believe that's the case since it has an entire page of information dedicated to it, ultimately this conspiracy theory is completely fake and was made solely to promote the movie. Outside of Reign in Darkness, any reference to the theory in forums debunks it as false, and websites that mention it all point back to Reign in Darkness as the origin point of the theory. And seeing how little discussion this fake theory has hatched over the internet, I'd say the attempt to use it as a viral marketing ploy was a complete flop. Disregarding the claims that this movie tries to make about K-17 in the real world, the virus does play an important role in the movie's story. We are introduced to the main character, Michael Dorn, who is played by one of the directors of the movie, Kelly Dolan. Dorn is a member of a research group trying to make the cure for HIV. Little does he know that his superiors are actually guiding him to make a new mutagen of the K-17 virus. And this is where it gets funny, because Michael Dorn and a hired gun start going around the city trying to test their new cure on random hobos who have HIV. Dorn gets into a scuffle with one of the homeless people and accidentally injects himself in the leg with the syringe. He shoots his partner in the leg, makes his escape, is hunted down by a special task force apparently employed by his company. They shoot him and leave him for dead in an alley, and he somehow survives because, surprise surprise, he turns into a vampire. To satiate his bloodlust, he decides to only suck the blood of criminals. Meanwhile, the hired gun from the beginning of the movie goes to a mysterious group known as the Council, which is basically just a dark gym room floor, and they tell him to employ other assassins to find and kill Michael Dorn.
He is a risk to the project and must be disposed of.
And that is the needlessly complicated setup of this movie. The rest of the movie is the main character fighting off the assassins hired to kill him and trying to find out the origin of the K-17 virus, which is of course that it comes from vampire blood, and that this entire plot was a giant conspiracy by the Council, which is actually a vampire council of the last remaining pureblood vampires who are trying to take over the world. We are guided along this bloated story by a voiceover narration by the main character.
My name is Michael Dorn.
Which is delivered in such a dry and monotone manner that at points it sounds like the actor was stoned while recording it.
Our research began 2 years ago with the highly classified reintroduction of the K-17 virus.
The voiceover also mentions characters and places that don't appear on screen until later or sometimes at all, creating a confusing dissonance between what you're seeing and what you're hearing.
Our team consisted of 4 people. Myself and Scott, we did all the lab work. And then there was Alex. We reported to him. He was our coordinator. He was a smart man, but totally anal. The final member of our team was Lance. What can I tell you about him? This guy was a psycho, a walking robot.
And if all of this wasn't enough, the narration is written with an air of pretentiousness that suggests that the movie is a lot deeper and more dramatic than it actually is.
I was part of a small team of molecular biologists selected to work on what I believed was a cure for the plague of the 21st century, HIV. If the virus were to ever seep into society, the world as we know it would be changed forever. I now saw before me the monster I had become, and now I was to suffer at the hands of my own creation.
But the narration is not the only terrible voiceover in this movie. All of the dialogue was dubbed over in post.
Did you hear the news, Scotty?
Yeah, it's been all over the TV.
And the best part is, half of the cast is putting on cartoonish caricatures of American accents, the best of which is the hired gun at the beginning of the movie, who is an over-the-top representation of a typical Southerner.
Fuck your kind. You want me to work with that asshole? My price goes to 100,000.
What the hell you doing, boy? What the hell we got here, boy?
Come on out, you fuckers!
Even outside the accents, the delivery of some of these lines is just golden.
Fuck you and your issues! Sweet Jesus!
Yeah, we got a situation here, man. Yeah, get your ass around here now. You hear me? Fuck.
Shit!
And when all of these elements of bad acting coalesce, it leads to some amusingly bizarre moments.
I don't give you tons of the shit each week to shove up your arm for nothing, you know. Are you listening to me?
I ain't got time for this shit. You didn't have to do that.
Well, I guess you got to find yourself a new supplier.
A majority of the movie's scenes take place in abandoned buildings that are either dilapidated or covered in graffiti, something I'm sure was dictated by the movie's small budget. When you have a $49,000 budget and you have aspirations fit for a $49 million budget, you get scenes like the opening where an unseen vampire stalks a woman in a park. It's a scene that was clearly filmed during the day, but a dark blue filter is just slapped across the image to give it the appearance of night. Then it switches to a red filter to imply the monster's point of view, which doesn't help sell the blue filter as anything but an ugly and lazy attempt to fix the footage in post-production. To the film's credit though, despite its grandiose ambitions not matching up with its amateur budget, there aren't very many bad special effects in the movie. In fact, special effects are generally avoided, though not in a smart way. In a scene where the main character blows up a K-17 factory, the explosion is implied through sound, and we only see the character's reaction to it. Which is honestly a lot funnier to watch than the actual CGI explosion that happens at the end of the movie. And that's pretty much the extent of the special effects in this movie beyond some scenes with some obvious invisible wire work, which is surprising given all the action set pieces this movie tries to pull off. Even so, the action scenes here are laughably terrible. There's 2 separate shootout scenes in 2 separate abandoned buildings, and both are poorly choreographed. There's this random scene where 2 villains have a nunchuck competition. There's also a bizarre scene where the redneck assassin just snaps and shoots up the council room.
Fuck the council! You can all burn in hell!
There's a climactic battle near the end of the movie in a garage between the main character and one of the villains who is wearing a ridiculous looking costume, and they fight over the ownership of a sword that looks like it was purchased at an anime convention. And at the end of the movie, after a nearly 6-minute long exposition dump by the Vampire Council,
Let me take a moment of your time to explain. We are the last of the pure-blood vampires. A dying breed that has slowly over time, as man and his technology finally evolved. We were living in old times with old ways. The new enemy was no longer man, but man's greed. As we watched our brothers die, technology had to build this, was now killing us, finally caught up and confining us to this mission. Recreated HIV as a means of ridding.
Shut up!
the main character kills them all by shooting his gun and swinging his sword around in the dark. But by far, my favorite action scene in the movie is a car chase that takes place about halfway through. It's probably a good time to mention that a running joke among the few people who've actually seen this movie is that despite the poor production quality, there's some really nice cars throughout the movie, and there's a lot of shots showing them off. Personally, I'd like to believe they blew most of the budget on these cars because that would be absolutely hilarious, but there's honestly no way to tell with how little information exists about the production of this movie. In the car chase, the main character hops into his very nice car to go after someone else in a very nice car in what is probably the tamest and most toothless car chase I have ever seen. Despite cutting away to shots of characters pumping the gas pedal, it's very clear they're just driving the speed limit. It's also apparent that whether they bought these cars for the movie or rented them, they couldn't wreck them, because there's shots where the main character threatens to ram into the other car, but he never actually does. It's like he's just fucking with the other driver. There's even one point in the chase where the main character overtakes the other car and cuts him off, but instead of shooting him or even doing anything, he just stares at him until the other car just goes around. And then the chase keeps going. The chase finally ends when the main character starts shooting at the other car, causing it to crash. But of course, we don't actually see the crash, we just hear a noise and see smoke coming out of the car, implying that it crashed into a wall. Despite all the poor execution in the action scenes though, there are a few genuinely good moments in them that really took me off guard. In one of the shootouts, it ends up with the main character cornered on a roof, and when someone shoots a crossbow at him, he catches it in midair, and it's actually kind of well done. Similarly, amidst the poor choreography of the garage sword fight, there's a moment where the main character is seemingly disarmed, but in a surprise move, blocks his opponent's blow with 2 pistols. All of this brings me to why I wanted to talk about this movie at all. Above the fact that it's an embarrassing and hilarious display of incompetence and overambition, I ultimately find the spirit of this movie endearing. Making a movie with a concept and story like this on such a low budget requires an outrageous level of tenacity by the filmmakers. While the final product is embarrassing, I admire the filmmakers for having the bravery to risk embarrassment. Much of the information about this movie's production has been buried by time, but according to the few sources I could find, this movie was made by a couple of marketing executives who had never made a movie before. This does mean that the concept and marketability of the movie was put at a higher priority than the quality of the actual film, but it doesn't take away from the passion that so clearly went into making it. These guys were a crew of complete newbies who were so inspired by the movies they loved that they decided to act on their inspiration and make something completely crazy. Creating art is inherently personal, and releasing it to the public is a scary step because it opens you up to possible mockery and ridicule over something you poured your heart and soul into. The amount of fearless bravery required to make something like Reign in Darkness and release it to the world is something that I find incredibly admirable. It reminds me of the kind of adventurous artistic spirit that you really only experience as a child. And sure, this isn't a couple of kids with a camcorder. It's a crew of adults with thousands of dollars. But that doesn't mean that the purity of their will and determination is something to be mocked. Just like anyone else who devotes years of their life to a film project, these were people passionate about making movies. The director, Kelly Dolan, intended for Reign in Darkness to be the first of a trilogy. It even ends on a cliffhanger, which is basically the same as the end of The Terminator, with a voiceover about an uncertain future as our hero drives off on a straight highway.
I did not know what the future would bring, but with Raphael, Lance, and the remaining test subjects still out there, I knew my job was not done.
However, funding was never secured for the second movie, and as a result, the other 2 films in the trilogy were never made. Despite this, Kelly Dolan did not give up. He went on to direct 2 other feature films and a Star Wars fan film, which is actually available in full on YouTube. No, his films aren't good, and he's never going to be the next Scorsese, but if there's one thing I want to say to the director and crew of Reign in Darkness, it is, thank you for making this movie. I want everyone who made this movie to know that there's at least one person who enjoys it, even if it's in a way they didn't intend. And if there's one thing I want to say to the audience watching this, it would be to seek out this movie. If you can even find a way to watch it, that is. Yes, it's bad and kind of boring, but it's also hilarious and bizarre and oddly inspiring. It's my hope that this video will help bring this movie out of obscurity and help find it an audience that appreciates it like I do. Because Reign in Darkness is a testament to the brave, creative spirit of young filmmakers everywhere. And it's a gut-bustingly good time.
That's for the U.S. Marines, boy!